working. All right, over in YouTube, Facebook land, can you guys hear me all right? Because looks like anything better? It looks like it should be better now if you guys can hear me over there in Facebook and YouTube land. Good. Okay, thanks, Mike. Yeah, appreciate that. Yeah, I have a lot of settings over here that I have to work with. So anyway, just to recap what I was saying for you guys over there. Yeah, awesome. Is that the CPI came out lower and lower than expected, but that the website, basically the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, were saying that basically everything inflation-wise is still up. The only thing that's down is food and energy, which was what contributed to the lower overall numbers. So, it's like interesting. Great. We're still experiencing high inflation except for these two, yes, major components, but, it's still a little fishy out there, a little bit fishy. So then I wanted to talk about a couple trend lines that I'm seeing, some that have become, that were resistance and now are becoming support. And so this is a thing that I can actually show in two different ways. So it might be something we have to pay attention to. And just that this might really be continuing the short squeeze in a major way. So we're going to kind of look into that a little bit. Yeah, Travis. So yeah, the short squeeze closing today seems to be holding so far. That's kind of what I'm leaning on. So if we look here at the NASDAQ, and let me show you here on a higher, time frame so that we can get a little bit bigger picture. So there are a couple things, and I can show you guys this on ARK and a couple other tickers or ETFs. Let's first look at this first trend line. So this is what I wanted to show. And for those of you in the free trading room or anybody else out there on Facebook, YouTube, I don't often use trend lines, but since the market's been really kind of all over the place, I've been finding that just kind of throwing on some trend lines has been helpful. And what we can see is we're kind of, well, let me start over with that first one. So what you can see in through here, and you can see it right here too. It's the same trend line. And what you'll notice is that price finally was able to get past that trend line. You can see right here was able to get that past that trend line, and right here was able to get past that trend line. And then what you'll notice is it actually pulled back right there to the upper side of the trend line. And this is very, very similar to what I talk about with moving averages, is that, oftentimes daily 50 or the 50 SMA, whatever, if you're in a downtrend or uptrend, just reverse it. But if you're in a downtrend and that moving average is overhead and it just keeps pushing price down and it can't quite get past it. And then finally, one day, price is able to break through or get over that moving average or that trend line. That's what I consider to be the first move. And that's great. We like seeing that, okay, change of trend, something like that that's happening. And then often what you'll see, and this is kind of the confirmation that I then look for, is you'll see price come back and test the other side of that moving average or trend line. So you can see here how it broke over the trend line and then came back to test that trend line. It broke over the trend line and then came back to test the trend line. All right. And you can see the same thing here on the daily chart with the 50. You can see it broke over the 50 and then came back down to test the 50. And in this scenario, it happened to basically be the same situation. So that's kind of neat how that worked out. Now let me show you another one. You guys can then see this trend line right here, which is the same as this trend line. Okay, same thing, same place. And what you'll notice is that, here, and then it was resistance, and then it was resistance, and then, oh look, it finally broke through it. And you could, I suppose, say right here that it did test it, but I'm actually more interested in what we just saw yesterday into today because, well, the big news, right? And you can see right here, it actually came back down to test that trend line. So it's like, okay, well, normally we would say, okay, if it broke over that trend line, is it extended? Is this a problem? Did it overshoot and now it's going to pull back? Well, yes, it's going to pull back, but then what we look for is, can it hold that trend line? And so far, it looks like it's holding that trend line. And with the news du jour, of course, because we're in the CPI situation, it held. So as difficult or as uncomfortable as this may be, it does seem like the market's going to continue to move up. I was looking for a bit of a pullback because I really wanted to see, like here, how price pulled back to the daily 21. I was really hoping that price would pull back to the daily 21 and give us a little bit more substantial pullback and refresh. Part of the reason I was looking at that was also because I was noticing this level. So if you kind of look through here, if I could draw a straight line, if you can just imagine that's a straight line like that, you can see that that pullback would have been kind of into this support and then right in there. So that's more like what I was looking for. But, can't really fight the market. And so here's what it is. It decided it wanted a different trend line as opposed to the moving average and price support congestion area that I was looking for. So those are some things I wanted to bring to your attention and show you all what's going on over there. Okay. Interesting comments over in YouTube land. So we'll see about that. Okay. Anyway, so we look at that. And then if we look at the SOXX and we look at this is really what I was expecting. So we got this over in the semiconductors. And you can see we had that upper trend line, and right to that upper trend line, and we got the pullback. And we got the pullback to what? Basically the daily 21. Went a little bit further, almost to the daily 50, but basically right there. That's what I was looking for. So it is interesting to see that, say, the semis did it. Now, maybe that was because of news, because of NVIDIA, and I think Micron, MU, they both guided lower. And I think that was kind of a double whammy that helped push price down for the indices. And honestly, that is exactly what I was looking for, was this kind of situation. I wanted to see that on the S&P. I wanted to see that on the NASDAQ. And that, I think, would have given me what the things I was looking at more, a better entry price, because right, buy the dip, that kind of situation, as opposed to this continuation of a short squeeze that never had a pullback. The other thing on the semis that I was looking at is that we had price go higher and the Moxie indicator was trending down. So that was all perfect. And I was starting to see that with the NASDAQ and the S&P and that kind of stuff. So we got it here. We didn't get it on the other one. It's which is kind of, to me, chalking it up that this market is kind of challenging, because now that we've also had a bunch of earnings come out, we've seen all sorts of things with earnings. We've seen up, we've seen down, we've seen neutral. But yeah, that's kind of tough. Because if we look over at, see, what was it? Shake Shack. This was another example that I had used. And you can see here that right there up to the third ATR, and what it do? Pulled back to the 21. The same thing I was looking for the S&P and the NASDAQ and all that kind of stuff. Now, granted, it happened on earnings, but that's still the same thing that I was looking for the indices. That's what I wanted to see. And you can see here, price moving up, and the Moxie indicator was moving down, and then we got that dip. So let's see, Nick. Yeah, quick question on that pullback. Is your entry on impact that level, or are you waiting for the 15-minute 50 situation of the reversal? Yeah, so you know this. That's what I'm talking about. So if we go back to the semis, yeah, typically what I would be looking for is I want to see not just that impact, because I'm not much of a dip buyer. Although in this market, the dips have been getting bought, and it's the Moxie indicator, which is a momentum-based indicator, works well in a trending market, works well when things are flowing. Well, when we get some, let me just show you as an example, ARC, and I've been able to make a couple trades in through here, but when you get something like this that is literally just up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, a momentum indicator has a hard time. I guess the best thing is come more like Sam's indicator, which is an oscillator, and you just go from low to high, low to high, low to high. This is extremely difficult to be working with. Yes, you can look at these trend lines, and the trend lines for the most part have been working, and then you get these trend lines on the upper side and all that kind of stuff. So ideally, I would like to see price come down, and then you look for it to get back on top of the 15-minute 50, the Moxie indicator look good, and then you see things go back up. But in this market where we have been experiencing a whole lot of range bound or channel trading or news with all this economic data, the indicator and kind of my style of trading just struggles a little bit. So if we look at the semis here, what do we got? It was news today, and it was basically, I guess you could say, oversold because it went well outside of that third ATR and then bounced up. There were really no setups on the 15-minute time frame. In fact, I'd still at this point be hesitant about trying to buy or chase this right here, because we potentially have a 50-250 maneuver here on the 15-minute time frame, and the Moxie indicators spread. And we are still dealing with the first time of price trying to go over a downtrending 15-minute 50. So it's like, is the 15-minute time frame in an uptrend? Based on how I look at things, no, I can't say that it is, because the 15-minute 50 is not in an uptrend yet. It might be starting, but it's not actually in there yet. It has price engaged with the 15-minute 50? Not yet. And it kind of looks like, let's see, which one was it? CG and X. Yeah, this is one that I mentioned to you guys in the Moxie weekend video. And so what I talked about in the weekend video was like, hey, just kind of keep an eye on this. But, notice here, we got a couple things, like just what I was talking about, the semis. We got a 50-250 maneuver, didn't we? And for now, it did, or for then, it did hold the 15-minute 50. But what did I say in that weekend video? I said, well, the Moxie indicators still kind of spread, like that's not ideal. And so I was like, we got that, and we do have the hourly 50 up overhead. And I was like, well, maybe just give it a little bit of time and see what happens. And that was true. That was a good guidance, because it did come all the way back down like that. Now, this may actually end up being good, and I'm looking closely at this. Why? Well, double bottom, and double bottom off of the daily 50. That looks good. And that's mostly about it. But then we could see here the Moxie indicator has a positive divergence. And now look, it's much tighter compared to here where it was very spread. And that's part of the Moxie rules. When they're very spread from each other, it means that they don't agree with each other, and they're not as strong as that direction. But once they get much, much tighter and they look like one line, then that is a much stronger setup. So you combine that Moxie rule right there with compared to that, plus the double bottom, plus the divergence, plus price coming up into, say, an uptrending hourly 200 and a double bottom off the daily 50. It's like, well, that looks pretty decent. I'd like to think that that's going to be bullish, but this market has also been pretty tough. One of the ones we were looking at was ZM, and I decided to kind of take the bounce on this one, mostly because what I saw yesterday was that they really shoved this thing down yesterday, and they did it on big volume. Like, look at that volume right there. And that was a down day. So I looked at that and I was like, ooh, the market might be sending a bit of a message in through here. Even though this hourly chart is a potential trampoline move. So in a trampoline move is when price is below the 50, but the Moxie indicator is above zero. It's kind of like trying to push a beach ball underneath water. It wants to shoot back up because energy is still positive and price should not be below the 50. So I looked at that and I was like, usually when you see big, heavy volume on a down day, that's kind of indicative of something. So I was like, okay, so we got to bounce up today. And I thought, well, let's just take that. So we did. But yeah. Yeah. And then, Nick, check this out. So DNMR. I mean, look at this crazy crap that the market's throwing at us. So this name, I was holding through this, and I know there are a lot of lines in through here. So if you guys can kind of, just kind of look past those lines for a moment. I was looking at it here, holding the hourly 50, and it was holding the daily 50, all that kind of stuff. And then it just decided, nope, not going to. Okay. Well, then, very, very similar to what I just showed you with that CG and X. Well, look here. Here's a double bottom. Here's positive divergence. And notice we went from a very wide Moxie indicator, so weak, right, to a tight right there, just like I showed you on CG and X. And I was like, well, that looks pretty good. And that should be a trampoline move right here on the daily chart. And we got a double bottom, a little bit of positive divergence on the hourly. And we got a decent move out of that. It actually worked pretty well. But then 2 days before earnings, because earnings was just last night, over at the close yesterday. And I was looking at this. I was like, okay, 50, 250, but it seemed to be working. 50, 250, and it seemed to be working. And then it gets trounced for 2 days, and look at the volume that came into that thing on those 2 down days. I'm like, ooh, okay, again, take another clue. The market's trying to say, look, on down days, there's significantly more volume. Okay, well, I got to pay attention to that. And I don't want to just roll the dice on earnings, especially when it's just getting hammered for 2 days. So I figure, okay, let me get out of that. And the funny thing is, when I was making that move, I was looking at these trend lines, and I had the initial trend line. I had this kind of first upper trend line, and it had broken through. And I was like, okay, a lot of things are telling me maybe we shouldn't be in this. So I got out, and then I noticed, well, let me draw another trend line, and look at that. Now again, you never know these trend lines are going to work until after the fact. But then look what happened. Market's up today, and maybe it would be a different story if the market were down today. But now look at this, right back to where we came from. So this market is just, I mean, it's all over the place, really. That kind of stuff. So that's interesting. And then I look at things like Costco, and I'm watching this, and I'm looking for a 50, 250 maneuver. And I'm also noticing, look at the Moxie indicator. It's been trending down. Now it's below zero, and we're kind of just hovering. I would be looking at this and saying, this thing looks to me like it's starting to run out of upper momentum. And, not that I would be shorting it necessarily, although I do think eventually price is going to come back down to that daily 50 and then maybe more whenever the market's ready to roll over. But I would definitely not be long in Costco right now. That's what I'm gathering from this, is I would not be long in Costco. So then I take that idea and I go look over at Apple. And doesn't this look awfully similar to Costco? It's a little bit stronger, of course. Costco it's a little bit long in the tooth. Costco has been moving longer and looks a little bit more tired. Costco also has the Moxie indicator at zero, whereas Apple still has a little bit of energy left, still has some gas in the tank. But we also have a 50, 250 maneuver. And you know what? Even though price has bounced off of the hourly 50, and maybe we can get a couple more days up to the upside, I would be looking at this and say, wow, unless I'm a very, very short-term trader, or unless I'm a day trader, this would be a very, very unwise place to initiate a swing long trade. It just seems like I'm coming in at the 9th, 10th, 11th inning, something like that, and that there's just not much more meat on the bone. I mean, this thing has been running the third ATR for the last few days. And again, notice that the Moxie indicator divergence. And so, okay, market's up today and we got to bounce. Okay, fine. Now, the other thing I then look at, which one was it? Amazon. And I look at Amazon. I'm like, okay, same thing. How much more upside does Amazon even have? Because not only are you right, let me just draw a better line. It's hard sometimes to take a drawing pad right there. So we look at this, and we're coming right into a lot of resistance, a lot of other price congestion. And then the other thing is, from this move up, where are we at? Do you see that we are pretty much, other than one day, we have been gapping off of the daily 8 for 10 days? I mean, that is huge. That is a huge move up, and typically unsustainable at some point. And so I'm looking at that, and I think it's also up here at the 200. It's doing a 50, 250, and I just look at this and I'm like, wow, this thing is really kind of running out. I don't know how much further this thing can go. I personally would not want to be trying to initiate a long here for some sort of move to the upside. Again, maybe if you're a day trader or you got something you think is going to work, but that just does not seem lucrative to me. It feels like I'm coming in at the very end of a move on that one. So, I take that and then I look at the NASDAQ, and, I kind of look at the same thing. Look at that. So despite what I was talking about at the beginning of the session with these trend lines and all this stuff, I'm having a very, very hard time feeling comfortable trying to kind of retake any kind of long position thinking, okay, well, where is it going to go? Now, I suppose the idea, because I looked at Cube, actually I looked at a lot of different things, and just from a price standpoint, like just how this thing moved, I do see examples. And just because I saw that trend line this morning on the NASDAQ, I decided to try and draw a trend line on Cube to say, okay, what kind of similarities am I seeing, and what's the possibility? And of course, anything is possible in the market. And, the market can stay irrational longer than we can stay solvent, and short squeezes can definitely be a thing, and that might be where we're at. And so I was looking around trying to find other examples of like, okay, well, where what am I seeing out there? What's the possibility? And the S&P, the NASDAQ, and I'm like, well, I guess it could go straight to the daily 200 without stopping. Here's an example, Cube. And I've seen other examples. And the interesting thing about Cube is, and I don't know if this trend line is really a thing or not, but I just noticed that I put a trend line here and look how it kind of got over the trend line and then held the trend line just like the NASDAQ. And I thought, well, heck, if this short squeeze is going to keep going for a couple more days, then, maybe it actually just explodes to really squeeze more shorts. And then that's what takes us to the daily 200. And you'll notice that Cube is doing it on like an explosive move, way, way, way off of the daily 8, way outside of the third ATR, and almost kind of straight up for a couple days. Now, I don't know if the NASDAQ is capable or the indexes are capable of doing that, but just from a price chart standpoint, I just wanted to show you like, hey, and here's an example of something that, what if the NASDAQ does that? It seems pretty challenging, but what if it does? What if it does? So I just wanted to put it out there. I guess that it's possible. And my concern, and those of you guys in the Moxie room, you guys know I keep talking about this, but if we don't have any major or meaningful pullback, like we didn't get today, basically, and we just keep pushing, and we finally hit that 200, do we know what that is? 50, 200, 50. And you know what else that is? If we come over to here, and that's going to be us coming straight into the monthly 10, and you guys know I've talked about that a lot, and the weekly 50 and the daily 200. And apparently we're going to do it without a pullback. We're just going to go down and then up. And that really seems precarious to me. And then the other thing I'm looking at is if we look at the UVXY, and boy, I thought there was something here, but we're going to have to wait a little bit longer. The thing that is really getting like the hair on the back of my neck standing up on this is, number one, we are seriously pushing out here. Like we're dropping so hard that typically we see some sort of snapback at some point. Again, got to get the timing right. And the other thing I'm seeing, and this is what I'm really paying attention, is notice this divergence on the UVXY. Notice how the hourly Moxie indicator has basically been going flat since, well, for a month, over a month. I'm looking at looks almost like the end of June, I guess. So that's kind of when that started. And typically when I see something like this, it can be like this for a while, but when it finally kicks in, it's a big something. And so that's why I'm wondering that if this market has finally decided, hey, we're just going to do short squeezing, just squeeze everything out, and we're not going to pull back, the further and further and further that it goes up, and it goes up like this without a pullback, the riskier it gets, the more precarious it gets, the more unstable it gets. Kind of like if we look at Cube, look at this. If it goes straight up like that, there 50, 200, 50, and there is a giant gap, unsupported gap from that. So it might take a little bit more time or whatever and some more craziness, but I keep looking at this. I'm like, ooh, I don't know. I'm nervous about the next move after the short squeeze is done. So, I was trying to look for a pullback, didn't get it, and now it's making me nervous on the long side. So that's generally my spiel. Yeah, Nick. So yeah, people hit the eject button pretty quick these days. I've been doing the same thing. We gotta, you just have to. I think that's also why when we see something like, not necessarily eject button, but when you get any kind of gains, that's what they're doing. Up, down, up, down, up, down, up. So, are we having fun yet? Yeah. Yeah, so Rob, VIX, UVXY usually ready for retracement after 6 to 8 weeks. Yeah, and it's accelerating to the downside, which usually there's a snapback at some point with that waterfall. Let's see, Trader G, you're in your GBTC trade, up a few points. Do you see a particular target in mind for these shares? Well, I'd really let me come over here, and we'll have to see if this thing goes or not. But I've been watching the Bitcoin miners, and what I've been seeing them do is break past their daily 50 and start heading towards their weekly 21. And this is what I'm seeing for a fair amount of charts. And I'm kind of wondering, can Bitcoin get that done before the market rolls over? And maybe it'll be a quick couple of days, like maybe a quick couple of days will take you to the weekly 21. So all we need are a quick couple of days. And the other thing I'm looking at now, I know this is the ETF, and so I know that there's not really a gap when it comes to the Bitcoin futures, but there is probably like a single bar. But there is a bit of a gap there, and you can see that it is a thing. So I think typically that when price gets to a gap, it usually won't cover that gap the first time, but the second time, if it can start to get into that gap, it'll cross the gap. And that's why I'm looking at this and saying, well, if it can kind of get up here, it should beeline to the other side, mostly because either a gap or a very, very thin area. And so that's my idea for Bitcoin and all of that, to see if it can kind of go up that direction. So, all right, guys. Well, that is my time. Yeah, anybody over there in YouTube and Facebook and stuff, TG Watkins here, Profit Pilot, and over there at the Free Trader Room, this is where you guys can find me if you have any interest in what I do and Moxie Indicator and stuff like that. For the rest of you, Moxie, I'm going to be in the options room and in the Moxie room in about 30 minutes from now. So I'll see you there for another hour, and we'll be able to go a little bit deeper into some of the stuff I'm seeing. So thanks again, guys, and we'll catch you later.